you delude yourself, right? You start to believe your own lies. You
Yep.
isolate yourself from people who can hold you accountable. So then everything becomes permissive. You keep towing the line a little bit more and more, and like fine, I'm just gonna live for me, you know. So I had this completely just really evil way of thinking, and to my undying shame, I broke our marriage vows. I've been an adulterer, and so that was like after it happened too. I was just like, who am I? Like, I hated myself.
We are about to jump into this episode, but first, really quick, if you care about your health, you need to listen to this. Did you know that 90% of the active ingredient manufacturers for our pharmaceuticals, specifically our generic pharmaceuticals in the United States, are located in India and China? I experienced this firsthand when I was trying to get a hold of a very controversial generic drug in the height of the pandemic. I couldn't find it anywhere. And I remember telling my wife, man, it would be awesome if we could just have this stuff at home. Like, I was looking for black market sources for antibiotics, all kinds of things to just keep at our house. Anyway, you can do that now. That's why I've partnered up with the Wellness Company. They make these emergency medical kits that you can keep on hand at your home to have access to a lot of the most common generic drugs. I didn't even know this was possible, but yes, it's possible. It's legal. You have a call with them. One of their physicians will prescribe you all 8 of the drugs in the kit, as long as you're not allergic to any of them. And then you can have them at your house on hand for whenever you need them. Don't get caught needing something that you can't get because of powers beyond you. Take control of your health, your family's health. Keep an emergency medical kit on hand. Also, the Wellness Company has all kinds of other really cool products like their spike support supplement, which I've talked about before. It helps your body shed the spike protein, which, as you know, wreaks havoc all over your system. It's what caused the issues with the vaccines. It's what's causing the issues with long COVID and all that stuff. You can do something about it. So check out the Wellness Company, twc.health/freemind, and you'll get a discount using that link, 10% off anything you buy there, twc.health/freemind. Let's get into the episode. George, welcome to the show, brother.
How's it going, Dave?
Good, man. So we linked up through Matt. I say Boudreaux. I've heard him say Beaudreau.
Yep.
I don't know how the hell to say his name, but
I've heard him joke. He doesn't even know how to say it. So.
Yeah, he was recently on my show, and then I came on his show, and that's how we linked up. You and a bunch of awesome men were listening in when he had me on as a guest, and then we connected afterwards because you also have a podcast that I absolutely love the idea of, and I love what you guys are doing. So I wanted to come you on. Man, it's been a day.
Freudian slip right there.
I certainly hope not. I wanted to have you come on. There we go.
That's better.
Have you come on to talk about that, because I want to get everybody who listens to my show exposed to what you're doing, because it's a noble cause and it's all about fathering. And I'll let you talk about that. But yeah, man, welcome, George Hayworth, to the show.
It is awesome to be here, Dave. Just first of all, I just want to thank you for your time too, coming into the Apogee group and pouring into us and being an open book for us. So it's a real pleasure to meet you in that way. I wish I would have known you sooner, because I'm really excited to have you in my life now in a way, and kind of be able to bounce things off you in the future. And so yeah, man, it's great to be here and contribute, and we can talk about anything and everything.
Let's talk about being a present father.
Alrighty.
Because I'm a dad, you're a dad, and I think that fatherhood, as is manhood, is in a crisis in many ways today. And I don't mean that ubiquitously, but in general, there is, what's the best way to put it? Sort of this lack of deference that you used to see in society writ large for the role of a father in the household and in the life of a child in general, right? And I'm obviously there are subsets of the population who are more in tune with traditional values, who do value the role of a father, us being some of them. But in large part, man, it really seems as though the role of the father has been diminished. I think in some ways because of the rise of the sexual revolution and
Mm.
feminism and all these contributing factors, but it's resulted in this. And so that is a long-winded preface to tell me about what you guys are doing with your podcast and why it's important.
Absolutely, man. Agree with you too. There's a problem. So we are the Present Fathers podcast. It's me and three other guys. We are kind of lifelong friends, really. So two of them are a set of twins. So they've known each other their whole lives. And then I've known the twins for almost 20 years. And then the fourth guy is kind of a mutual friend of all of us. And through the years, we've stayed in touch. We all live in different states. We've all built our own families and lives in different places in the country. And we talk all the time. We're in a text group. We're kind of like our, your go to war group type of thing a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. So we bounce everything off each other. And really during like 2020, especially just seeing all the chaos going on, we were complaining about the status of our country and the way things are going. And so eventually we were like, all right, we got to do something about it. What can we do, with the limited resources we have and try and make a difference? And it was, well, let's start a podcast and let's dive into, whether it's reading a book and kind of making that the topic or inviting guests and kind of learning from them. Let's build kind of a one-stop shop for fathers to learn more, to think about things differently. And ultimately, the end goal there is if you help a father be better for his family, it's going to have generational impacts. And so that was the heart behind how we got started. We've been fortunate to have just a wealth of guests who want to come on and speak with us. So we've actually I think the last time we didn't have a guest was like over a year ago, like when we were just starting. So awesome. We've had an amazing perspective. You just get all these perspectives from all these different guys from all these different walks of life. Some are businessmen, some were special operations guys, some are musicians, just all these different perspectives. And I think that's really valuable because everyone can see that you're not alone. You're not the only guy who hasn't figured this out, that no matter how successful you are in one area of your life, you're probably not going to be successful somewhere else. And so I think that's a lie that like a lot of men believe, is that when they become a dad, they magically have to be like perfect and that they should have it all figured out, and nothing could be further from the truth. And so what I've learned personally just through this experience is, we all got to wake up and put our pants on one leg at a time, right? And we've all got similar struggles, and it's different scenarios, but at the end of the day, it's the same battles. So that's the heart behind the podcast. And really, we're just trying to make a positive impact on future generations. So I think you and I are very tightly aligned on that. I think that, you've been very vocal trying to make a difference in our country as well. So
yeah. So the Present Fathers podcast, I think being present, it's one of those terms that we often throw around that I think can be ambiguous. Mm-hmm. It gets used in a number of ways, right? So from your perspective and your team, your co-host perspectives, what does it actually mean to be a present father?
Yeah. Sure. So I'll actually back up a little bit. So we agonized over what to call the podcast, and we brought up a lot of ideas, and we wanted something that was going to be, had meaning to it, had a symbolism to it, and that would be timeless. And so the word present is it's a double meaning. So one, it's the present day, right? We're gonna tackle the issues of our modern era. And so, as long as we're doing this, it'll be the issues of the day. So that was kind of the first piece there. And then being present, I agree with you. It can be a very, very vague term. So what George thinks being present is really down to intentionality. So I think if you peel back the onion and look at what is the most foundational thing that a man needs to do for his wife and for his family is intention, right? Everything you do, whether it's your work or loving them or anything really, any facet of leadership, family leadership, it all comes down to being intentional. And so I think if you can build that discipline of being very intentional in all the things you're doing, and sometimes that requires explanation for your family to understand, you will be present, right? Because you have stripped away any distractions. Your heart is fully invested in where it needs to be in that moment, and you're giving it your best effort. And I'll also caveat that it's not to try and make people feel bad who either maybe they're in a divorce situation where they only get to see their kids some of the time, or you have a very demanding job that requires a lot of travel. Like I have to travel a lot, at least 50 nights a year. Um, it's what you're going to do with the time that you have when you're there. That's really the meaning.
Yeah, and that's what I think about when I think about that. I heard, I think it was Gary Vaynerchuk years ago talking about this, and it really struck me and it stayed with me because it is something I think hardworking dads who want to be a provider, especially if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you're running a business, but not even if you have a demanding job, if you have a job that requires travel, if you have a job with long shifts, right? It's really something that when you combine those things with also wanting to be a good father can weigh heavily on a man because it's pulling you away from your family, but you're also putting in all this effort to provide for them. And so, what Gary said, I always remembered this and I heard it when I was building my business. So, it really stuck with me because it applied to me in the moment. Um, he was catching a lot of flack for basically putting in long hours. He was one of the first guys to popularize and make sexy the grind and hustle mentality and all of that. Um, and he gave the analogy of, well, when I'm with my kids, I am all in with them. It's them. They're my focus. I'm present. I'm there for them. And when I'm working, I'm focused on that. And, he made the comparison of the guy, okay, so I work 12 hours a day, but then I'm with my kids for like the most intense, focused, all them, however many hours after that, right? Compare that to the dude who works a regular 8-hour shift, comes home, cracks a beer, sits on the couch watching football. Yeah, he's around his kids, sure. But how present is he, right? What impact is he having on their lives? And I think a lot about that when I hear being present, right? It's like the intentionality you spoke of, right? Moving with purpose. Like, and when I came on and talked to you guys, I talked about how, I bucket out family time and that is family time, nothing else. And I think that, if you're a guy struggling with this issue and you're listening, do that. Focus on making that time as quality as possible. And because, the age old comparison, right? Quality versus quantity.
Mhm.
If you have a large quantity of shallow, meaningless time with your kids and your family, that's nothing in comparison to having a shorter amount of time that's very purposeful, very intentional, to use your word, and concentrated, right? So I wanted to mention that because I think as men we can feel that guilt, right? And
Yeah,
I know
absolutely.
I've dealt with it. I'm sure you have, right? It's when you work a lot, it's a trade-off.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a real struggle, right? Like at the end of the day, you still have to provide. So it's not
Yeah,
like very select few people who have made billions of dollars can do whatever they want, right? Everyone else, we
right.
kind of have to somewhat work the grind and live in the system, and that's probably 99.9% of people listening to anything like this, right? So,
Yeah. Well, and shoot,
um,
most of those guys are they want to
they
keep
stay that
working.
rich because they were they're addicted to
Yeah,
work, right?
like
So yeah, it's
Elon works 18 hours a day and he's got, I don't, I lost count of his kids now. What has he got? 10, 11? I don't know.
I don't know,
So,
yeah.
yeah. But anyway,
Yeah, and
man.
it's not just your time too. I'd say the intentionality comes to just with like
Yeah.
everything, right?
Hmm.
A lame example could just be like, oh, you wanted to buy that, new guitar or whatever, but instead you're going to take your family on a trip. Like it's, what I mean? It's like
Right.
in the grand scheme of things. So what we're trying to do too is it's not like we have the one way. It's just to get the thoughts going and help guys with some practical advice on just I mean, let's take it back a little bit further. Like in knowing what I know about your upbringing, right? You probably didn't have a great mentor teaching you about how to be a dad before you were a dad, right? So that's kind of the thing too, is like, well,
Right.
hey, let's teach younger men what fatherhood should look like and things they can do to set themselves up to be a good father. Instead of like, oh, they're a father now and they're trying to make up for, mistakes, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of the intent there. Um, Kind of lost my train of thought a little bit there, but I mean, when it comes to being intentional, it may not just be your time. It could
Yeah.
be your energy. It's your money. It's that kind of thing. So
Right.
if
Right.
you fast
So
forward 20
intentional with your
years,
resources, basically.
right?
Time is
Yeah,
a resource. You are a
exactly.
resource. Money, obviously, right? So
Yep.
I get what you're saying for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, just like fast forward 20 years, right? Is your child going to remember um the toy you bought them, or are they going to remember that little, 3-day family trip you guys took to that place and it ended up being an amazing memory, right? So it's kind of that balance. And like you were saying, it's very easy to get caught up in the rat race and like, oh,
Mhm.
I got to work harder to make more money and provide more things for them. And sometimes maybe passing up the promotion is the right answer. Not always, but maybe it is. Or maybe your career change is the right answer. So we could talk probably all night on that, but I don't want to get wrapped around the axle too much. It's just at the heart of it, I think intentionality is probably the best first step. If you're a dad listening to this, or even not a dad yet and you're thinking about being a dad, analyze your life and just think about, am I intentional with how I live my life? How many hours am I wasting doing things that I really don't need to do? So for some people that may be video games, for some people that may be playing music, for other people that may be working in the yard, or, I mean, just like find a balance and really, really analyze what is excess, build some margin into your schedule. And then like you, Dave, great example. You have dedicated family time. Phones are off. There's nothing there. It's literally just for family. Like that's a great method because like you said, you're all in those moments.
Yeah. And that I can't take credit for that. I actually learned that from Seth Feroci. He was actually the very first guest I ever had on this podcast. He's awesome dude. He has several successful companies and he's a very present dad. And I was trying to coordinate with Seth to come on the show, and it's a Sunday and I'm texting him, no, it was a Saturday and I'm texting him. I'm not hearing back. I'm not hearing back. I'm not hearing back. Sunday goes by and I'm like, gosh, man, this dude's ghosting me. I can't believe it. And then Monday he texts me back. He's like, sorry, man, weekend is family time. Like that's a rule. I don't respond to anything. And that's when it really, because he's a guy I look up to and what he's accomplished in life, and especially as a dad, it got through to me that, oh, you've got to make this an actual rule. Like that, there's no exceptions. This is how it is, right? I don't respond unless obviously it's an emergency and whatever, but I'm with my family. This is family time. It can all wait. And so I really took that from Seth, and it does make a big difference, man, for sure. So
Yeah,
tell me about you though.
will
I
do.
know
What?
I know
Where do you want to
everything
start?
about you because I got this extensive biography here. No, man. So first off, I know you have one kiddo, right?
That's right. Yep.
Um, any plans for more?
Um, so that's kind of a complicated issue.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, 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 no,
I'm
no.
sorry.
Not like I can't talk about it.
Right.
We really want to. My wife had an extremely difficult labor the first time
Mm.
around with our daughter, and I mean, she was in labor for like almost 2 days straight. It was like really,
Whoa.
really tough. Yeah, it was not easy. And she had like severe postpartum, and like her body was just pretty much broken after that too. So there's like some serious concerns from a medical point of view. Like, I mean, is that going to happen again? The recovery aspect of it. So we've
Right.
been a little
Right.
hesitant with that. Um, and just in full transparency too, like our marriage has been a little bit up and down over the years. We just celebrated 10 years, and this is something
Congrats.
I thank you. I'd love to get into this though. A lot of it is from my lack of leadership,
Mm.
of my lack of being a husband with a vision and with intention. And unfortunately, here we are now, 10 years later, and yeah, we just have the one. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. We've prayed about it a lot. We talked about it a lot. I don't think that door's closed, but it's still something that like we haven't decided one way or the other. I'd
Gotcha.
love to have more, but there's just legitimate concerns about,
Of course. Yeah, man. Well, look, it took us, our daughter's 6 and we're about to have our second one. And, if I could go back, obviously hindsight's 2020, it would have been great to just keep cranking them out.
right.
But a big part of that for me was, I had no faith in my life
Mm,
until a year ago. And, the Christian mandate is, be fruitful.
right.
And now I'm like, all right, the clock is ticking because we're in our heading into our late 30s, right?
Yep.
Myself and my wife, and it's like, I don't know how many we can have. We're going to try to have as many as we can, but Mother Nature
Yeah.
has a timer on it. So I certainly get it, man, for sure. All right. I know you want to dig in on some marriage stuff, and I would love to dig in on some marriage stuff because you know, I'd be lying if I said the 17 years I've been with my wife has been perfect. And I can relate 100% when you said that it was due to your lack of leadership because, and look, it takes two to tango. Obviously, any
Yep.
relationship, both partners contribute to the issues, but I contributed most. I definitely can take credit for most of the contribution towards any issues we've had. And so I would definitely love to dig in on that a little bit more. However, you're comfortable, because I think a lot of men and, tons of women listen to the show as well. And I think they appreciate this sort of insight
Mhm.
from men also. I hear from girlfriends, wives, all kinds of people that are basically reaching out to me sort of in crisis, like, how do I get my husband to
Mhm.
XYZ? And I'm like, I'm not the guy you shouldn't be
S-
reaching out to some random guy on social media about
Yeah.
this,
So I
but
actually can answer that if you'd like right now.
yeah,
On
yeah.
the answer is you can't. You can only fix yourself. So, I don't know if we should just jump straight into marriage stuff. Maybe we need to start with a little bit of my background to get to like marriage and everything because I think
I told you before we started, we can
it
take
might
this
be
however
telling
you
only
want.
half the story if we just start right at
Yeah.
marriage.
All right. So let's talk about your background. Military
Okay.
background, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, like upbringing pretty good most of my life until 16. My parents
Right.
divorced and it was super
Divorce.
ugly. Um, and that's a whole complicated issue, which through that whole process, in adulthood, I learned that I really had some serious childhood wounding from that whole experience and everything that kind of went down. Um,
You learned that like really late into adulthood?
in like my mid 20s, I had really had to
Okay.
wrestle with the reality of like, hey, this stuff did mess me up, and if I don't deal with it, it's gonna kill my marriage. So that's
Mm.
why I wanted to maybe start back a little bit because like so my story, most people like, oh, I was in the military and have PTSD or whatever. Like I'm not that guy. I'm very fortunate. I didn't see anything that traumatic. I think I was mentally just really ready for it anyway. And I'm kind of like the opposite of the typical story here. Like all my stuff is like childhood stuff that got brought forward into my adult life that was unresolved, and
Mm.
that's what's kind of it reared its ugly head.
Did you
At
have
really
siblings?
Yeah. So I'm the oldest of three. So it's me, my younger brother, and then my youngest sister. Um, and
Mm.
we're all like 2.5 years apart. So my parents were definitely on a schedule, like
Do
you were
you
saying.
yeah, yeah. Do you have, any knowledge as to whether sort of some of the childhood things you dealt with, they also dealt with, or do you think the burden of a lot of that fell on you as the oldest?
So with me specifically, I think the bulk of um, I'll just bring it up. It's called emotional incest, and most people probably not heard that term before.
I had
Um,
not until I
yeah,
read your write-up, so
yeah.
I would love to dig in on that.
So I first learned about this, like I said, in my mid 20s. Um, and we've had the same marriage counselor for our entire marriage, which is awesome. So she knows like our whole story, all our crap, which is great because she can give real targeted advice,
Mhm.
and like knows really what's going on. It's not like, oh, she just said this, right? She recommended this book called Silently Seduced, and man, that kind of like messed me up because it was like having this realization of and I'm sure you have a similar experience, like when you really came to grips of like what your upbringing was like. I'm sure that for
Mhm.
a while it just felt like the world crushed you. Um, so I kind of felt like my whole childhood was a lie almost. It was this very like existential crisis. Anyway, emotional incest is when one parent uses a child to satisfy their emotional need that should be met by a romantic relationship. Um,
Ah,
so
okay.
in a way, it's like, I hate to put it this bluntly, it's like emotional rape. Okay, and I'm recently reading this other book called Healing the Wounded Heart, and that therapist, that I think is a psychologist, I don't want to misquote his title. He doesn't actually make a distinction between physical rape and emotional incest. He says that the damage that happens to the psyche is identical. Um, so yeah, I was the oldest, right? So and I want to preface all this with like, I know my mom loves me. I don't think she intended to be like a horrible person to me or anything like that. So for anyone who's hearing this who may know her, we still talk. I love her very much. I know that she, for all her faults, was just a wounded person hurting and did her best to take care of all of us. So I'm going to preface with all of that. This isn't a bash my mom session, but what was happening is, things like, oh, George, you're the oldest, so I'm going to share this with you because the other kids can't handle it. And then it's like details about my father and their divorce or their relationship that no kid should know. And so when that's at first, here's the really twisted thing, right? Is it makes you feel good because it's like, oh, I'm more mature.
Right.
I am a young man. I can handle this, But in reality, it's like you're a kid dealing with adult issues that even adults shouldn't have to deal with. Like divorce is not the goal, right? So it's a messy issue that gets anyway. It really spirals, and so it distorts your entire reality of what you think relationships should be and what you think love is. And so I'm not saying any of this to like excuse away any of my behaviors, but the realization of how I approached any romantic relationship my entire life up to this point was that was pretty shocking to kind of like come to grips with that I probably had a very flawed understanding of what like love and marriage should be.
So was it
Because of that.
primarily her venting to you about your dad, or were there any sort of um, confidential type of this is just between you and I type of
Yes, yeah,
conversations?
all of
Or
that.
yeah,
Yeah, all of
I
that.
I honestly, man, I dealt with that too. I was the oldest,
Mhm.
have a younger sister. My parents were a mess, but my dad was gone when I was 3, and 100%. It was I was dude, I've never even heard of this term, and I'm like reflecting back on all these different
Mhm.
instances of, really bad stuff because my mom was super young. She was 16 when I was born, so I'm, 12 years old and she's only 28, right? And she's telling me stuff about,
Yeah.
really bad stuff like some guy she hooked up with, oh, he had a small blah blah blah, and like
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
12, right? So I know exactly the kind of thing you're talking about.
Mhm.
What other sort of, because she definitely complained about my dad and all that stuff, and I think that, maybe you can speak to this, but I would hazard to guess that it's probably most common in the relationship between like a mother and the oldest son.
Yep.
Is that
Yeah, I
true?
think if I remember correctly from the book Silently Seduced, that's like almost always the case. Um,
Right.
and I
Right.
think it's something to do with just like you don't see the inverse of like father to a daughter type of situation because I think inherently like men we don't connect emotionally like that. That's not our default, but it is a woman's default. And again, before anyone tries to cancel me, that's not, I'm speaking in generalities. Obviously there's an exception to every rule. It's the spirit
Yeah.
of the thing. And I think the statistics would back up what I'm saying. So I'm not trying to like say one is better or right or wrong. But I think if I remember correctly, yes, almost all instances of what I'm describing is mother and oldest son.
Yeah.
Um, because it's like you become the man of the house, right? And so it's kind of this
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
become your father, but you're not really. And it's see, I mean, it's just like it's so messy. It's like Oedipus complex type creepy stuff. And so
Sure. Sure.
it gets really twisted really fast when you really start to like clinically break it down. Um,
So what is the result of that, George, later in life with how you see and approach relationships? Because you said you had these
mhm.
realizations later. What effect does that have?
Yeah, so like I was essentially jaded to think that like everything is manipulation. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So although I would say I'm trusting, I wasn't really trusting. And so then there's also like the need to control. You become super codependent. Um, you know how like kids of like an alcoholic parent or whatever, they're like always walking on eggshells and they're always like really in tune to like, well, are they in a good mood or not? Kind of the
Mhm.
same thing. Those types of same behaviors start to manifest. So none of it's really healthy. And I'm saying all this too is like I really haven't been through that much. Okay. So I'm not trying to like say like, oh, woe is George. Dave, like your story personally that I know is significantly more difficult than what I went through. So
No, no, I don't
it's
believe that
just something.
actually because, and I want to
Yeah.
say this because I don't think anyone should discredit their own personal experiences, because no matter what, the worst thing you've been through is the worst thing you've been through,
Mm. It's
right?
true.
And it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, that I think that's a lot of the reason why society is the way it is today, because the worst thing a lot of young people have been through pales in comparison to the worst thing generations before them have been through. So
Right.
their compass for what what hard work is, what negative feelings are, what being mistreated is so skewed, because you've heard the circular, hard times create
Yeah.
strong men create good times create weak men, etc. I mean, it gets rattled off in so many contexts these days, but I think that it has direct application here, right? Like, you can't
Yeah.
say I've experienced nothing like what you've experienced, brother, because we the worst thing any of us have experienced in our mind probably elicits the exact same emotion, right, as the
Yeah.
worst thing that anyone else has experienced. So I just want to say that. And so I don't diminish anything that's happened to you or anybody. And it took me about 30 years to realize that, because, bro, I used to play the comparison game and be like, "Psh,
Mm.
you had it so good. My parents used to beat the crap out of me. I've seen my dad smoke crack. I've seen my mom, prostitute herself, all this stuff." And it's like, it took me a very long time. And part of it has been being married to a woman who did live a very charmed life.
Hmm.
But the bad things that have happened to her had the exact same effects on her, man. And so, just for anybody listening, like, don't discredit your own personal situation or the situation of others, because it's the worst thing is always the worst thing, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
No, I appreciate that, and
yeah,
yeah, I guess I shouldn't have been so self-deprecating, because I actually do believe that, also, and it's something I had to learn too, even with my own marriage, right?
right, right.
Or even with like other relationships.
So,
So
before you were married, were you in any other long-term relationships,
yeah,
or yeah?
yeah. So I had like a long-term high school girlfriend, like 2 years, and then
Did you have
I
trust
had
issues with her?
no, not really. I was just like young and immature. My parents are in the midst of their divorce, and like it was
Mm,
honestly, it was more like she became like a coping mechanism for me. So I was probably super manipulative to her,
I
if we're
see.
honest.
I see.
Um, and again, it made me feel she was older, like she was a senior and I was a
Mm,
sophomore, and it was like, oh,
yeah.
I'm the big man on campus now, type of thing. And in
Right.
reality, it was just a scared little boy, right?
Well, that's
Uh,
that's sort of a manifestation of the same role that you played in your home
yeah,
once
a little
dad
bit,
was gone, right? You were the man of the
right?
house.
Yeah, if we really psychoanalyze me, I'm sure, I'm sure
I'm
there's a
I
lot
know
of
I'm turning into Jordan Peterson on you here.
yeah.
Uh,
No, but
it
it's interesting
it
to
is
consider.
interesting, man. And
Yeah,
and I just like talking about that stuff, because you know how it is when you're a man. We often don't talk about this stuff, and
right.
I had the same realization way later in life. Dude, I was just like, I would play the comparison game with other people. I would also talk down on therapy.
Mm,
And, I that's for weak people. I don't need that. And it's because the way I grew up, I had to build this hard armor in
yeah,
order to navigate life, right? But
as your survivor man syndrome. Yeah,
exactly, exactly. And
yep.
and I realized later, bro, when I finally did, my wife insisted that I go to therapy, and I did it initially to appease her, and then I found so much value in it, because this therapist broke down those walls, went right to
Hmm.
my child. As soon as I tried to brush over my childhood, she's like, "Hold up, right there. Wait,
Wait, what
what
happened?
exactly?" And I'm like, "Oh, I just teenage parents beat the shit out of me. Did drugs."
Yeah,
She's like, "Okay, we're gonna spend some sessions on that, brother."
right.
Um, and what I discovered was so many of the, like, negative character traits that I exhibited as an adult stemmed directly from that. And just
Hmm.
like you said, it's not you know dissolving myself of any blame, but it's just realizing where it came from, so you can then change course, fix the issues you're dealing with, right, and move forward. So with your emotional incest, and that just sounds so bad. They need to come up with a
It's.
different term for it.
I think they intentionally picked that term because yeah, ew, yucky. That's the first
Yeah,
thing anyone thinks when they hear it, right? And
yeah.
it's yucky. And so that's one thing too. Like um, I caution anyone who is going through a divorce or you're having a custody battle and that kind of stuff, the words you use with your kids in this time have the potential to damage multiple generations that follow you. So your marriage is over. Okay, fine. But both of you have the obligation now to not bash the other parent and not to twist words and manipulate relationships. Because if you do, one, they're going to find the truth out eventually. They will reject you at some point because all you're doing is sowing seeds of manipulation and hatred. And in the long term, they are now going to be stunted when it comes to any of their relationships. Not with certainty, but you're setting them up for failure. So that's a huge word of caution for anyone in that situation. And unfortunately, most men are in our system that we have in this country often get very unfairly isolated from their kids. And that's what happened with my dad. My dad never beat me. He never did any of that kind of stuff. And we did a whole. My dad actually came on our podcast and shared a lot of this experience, which was extremely healing to kind of do it with him. But I mean, I got to see my dad. Actually, let me back up. I didn't want to see him because it was all his fault. That's what I was led to believe.
Was that because you were told that?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So for 10 years, my dad and I were very estranged, and he could only see us court mandated once a week for 2 hours or something, and had to be in a public place. And and in hindsight, I'm just wow, how is that even allowed to happen? My dad should have had us half the time. He never did. He never laid a finger on us. He never did anything. Him and my mom, yeah, they could have done a lot better on their marriage, right? Both of them are responsible for that. But when it came to being our parents, they both had just as much right to be equally involved.
Yeah.
And so, now I have that's another reality I have now. I'm 35, and from the time I was 16 to almost 28, yeah, I think I did the math right on that. I hardly ever talked to my dad, hardly shared anything with him. He wasn't involved in any of these critical milestones in my life of becoming a lieutenant in the Army and getting home from Afghanistan and getting married and having a baby. And so, I've lost all these potential moments that could have been with my dad, so it's the pain just kind of keeps progressing. And so that's again, my word of caution to anyone in that situation. Do not badmouth the other parent. Resist the temptation. If you need to vent, you need to go find someone who's not one of your children and say, look, I just need to get this off my chest, and do it that way, or go see a therapist, or both. But when you involve the kids, you are setting up generations for failure. Just think about that consequence.
So for you, I mean, those were really formative, important years as a young man when
Definitely.
your dad was kind of out of the picture. Did that affect you? I mean, I'm assuming the answer is yes. So how did that affect you?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I did ROTC, so I graduated high school, got the scholarship to go to college and do the Army stuff. And I'm a weird kid in the family. I'm the only one to volunteer for the military in 50 years or something like that. So I didn't really know what I was getting into, to be honest.
Where did that come from? Where did that come from?
That's what I was getting to it.
Okay.
So I always wanted to serve my country in some way. So I was very idealistic, very hardworking, all that kind of stuff. But if I'm really brutally honest with myself, I think it's because I was a wounded 16-year-old boy who wanted to prove himself as a man, and this was the best way I could do it. I'm not a very big, physically imposing guy. When I'm a little bit bigger now. I've worked on it for the last 12 years or so. But when I graduated high school, I wrestled at 125 and 130 in high school. So I was one of the little guys.
But you wrestled.
I did. I wrestled, but I'm no one to look at me and be like, oh, what a physically imposing man. Run in terror at the Mighty Mouse over there. So. For me, in a lot of ways, I was seeking validation that I should have got from my dad. Right. And so I'm I'm extremely proud of being in the military, and I loved it. And leaving active duty was a hard decision. But when I reflect back on it now, I really do think I was trying to fill a hole that, I think at some point, every young man wants to prove himself as a man. That's natural. It's ingrained in us. But for me, it was like to an unhealthy degree. And so, my superiors and the guys I deployed with and everything, they became the validation I needed. And so all my identity became solely wrapped up in George proved himself in the Army.
Mhm.
And if you take that away, then what are you, right? So,
Right.
and anyone can fall into this trap, right? It could be your job. It can be something you do. It doesn't necessarily have to be like the military. But for me, that was my medicine in a way to
Yeah.
try and fix this wound.
Yeah. Dude, it's like I'm looking in a mirror that's just slightly different. And I think a lot
Yep.
of men deal with this, man. And we, men, uh, it's really, I've tried to have this conversation with women, and it's so tough because what I try to stress is like, we are different. You just got to understand that, right? And men
Hmm.
need to be needed. Like, we need purpose. We
Yep.
crave it, right? And we will find it somewhere. If you're an inner city kid that's caught up in drugs and the gang life,
Yep.
right? You found your purpose. It's not a good purpose, but you've so young men are constantly seeking that, right? And as fathers now, we're both fathers. We both have girls, but you know, to any fathers listening, like if you have a boy, you need to keep that in mind, man, because as he grows into a young man, into a teenager, like whether it's sports or, for me it was athletics in school,
Yep.
and thank God for that because it was really only because I saw that as rebellion against my crappy parents. Like education was the antithesis to everything they represented. So I was like, I'm going to do great at that.
Yeah.
Um, or it could be any number of things. And I have so many friends who are guys that I grew up with, and now knowing what I know now in retrospect, when I look back at some of my best guy friends, they were all going through that, man. We all go through that. We need
Hmm.
to be needed. And it, dads are so important in that capacity, especially to a
Yes.
young boy. And it's just I just wanted to say that because gosh, man, it's again going back to how we started. I think dads just don't, and you spoke to it with the legal system, like they're diminished in their importance, and
Hmm.
there's certain communities in this country especially that are, have 70% single motherhood rates in the black community and in certain impoverished areas of America, and
Yeah.
rural whites in Appalachia and stuff. And it's like, if you want to break that cycle, dude, you got to be a present dad. Like that is
Yep.
truly the answer to this stuff, right? So anyway, um with you, you tried to fill the void with the military, and it sounds like you obviously don't regret that. You just realize what purpose that was serving initially. Once you got in, did you ever feel at a point where, because what I experienced with that craving to fill the void was, eventually I found out that the thing, whatever thing it was at whatever stage of my life, wasn't sufficient,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Did you experience that in the military, or did sort of the mission and the your involvement in the military take over and supplant that initial need to just fill the void of importance, and then you were just caught up in serving?
I think a little near the end of my time on active duty. So like I joined uh or I mean I graduated college, commissioned as a lieutenant. You go to your basic course and then you hit your first unit, and this was 2012 is when I got to my unit,
Mm,
and that was still pretty much at like the height of the deployment cycles and stuff.
right.
So like I showed up and I was in Afghanistan I think 3 months later, four
Wow.
months later. So it's very rapid turnaround during that time, um, which was kind of awesome because like you're like right in it, right? You get to do the real, like everyone talks about like football, right? You don't just like practice all day to never play a game, right? You want to go play the game, and like people, I think a lot of people maybe struggle to understand this, but like soldiers want to be soldiers. They don't join to sit around and like listen to briefs and type PowerPoints. They want to
Mhm.
shoot guns and like go fight, I mean, and like at some level, that's not inherently an evil thing. Like that's also a masculine thing. Like it's part of it. there are things about combat and warfare that bring out the best in men. There's also a lot of terrible things, but to straight up say that like, oh, men are evil because they want to go do that is also it's a disservice to everyone. That's a whole tangent we can go on, but so anyway, for me right away, super validating, right? I was surrounded by an incredible group of soldiers, both officers and NCOs and soldiers, who trained me just on like all aspects of not just being a soldier, but like being a man, you know? And so I grew up a lot real quick. And I know I was a naive little kid and I had a lot to learn, but I was hungry to learn and work hard and kind of be one of them. And so for me, yeah, it was that first hit, like you're saying, dude, it was addictive. I had met my wife before I deployed. So we were dating. She said, no, I'll wait for you. I want to stay with you. So we talked our whole deployment. We got home, kind of had the whole like, you know, I recommend people maybe not do this. We got home, pretty much got married almost right away. You know, classic story. You've probably heard a million military people say that, but
oh yeah,
yeah. So like, it was just us, and actually things were really great early on. Like we were excited. You know, I felt like I had been tested in a deployment, and you know now I was like at the top of my game, and it was becoming a father. That was when like overnight things shifted for me. It was like, ooh, I don't know if this whole Army game is what I want to put my family through anymore. You know, because I stopped in that moment, and then instead of living in the moment, I started looking ahead to the vision. Oh, I'm responsible now for the future of not just myself. And I should have had this realization with my wife too. So this should have been sooner. And I looked ahead. I'm like, man, I'm gonna have to do. You know, I'm gonna go back. We're gonna go back to the next training place I have to go for school, and then go to the next unit. I'll wait my turn to be a commander. I'll command, and then I'll go back to the next school, and then I'm going to be on staff for like a decade, and then maybe one day I'll get to be a battalion commander somewhere. And I was like thinking about all the hours I wasn't home, not going to the field, not training soldiers, because I was in a more administrative job at the time. And I was like, this is a bad deal for my family. Like, I mean, I love the Army. I want to do this forever, but this is not good for them. And so, yeah, man, that it was a pretty quick. Maybe 6 months after my daughter was born, it was like we gotta leave, you know. Anyway, so that's when I had the kind of feeling of like it's not scratching the itch anymore. Right. That was a very long-winded way of answering your question, but
no, I get it. It makes total sense, man.
It worked until it didn't.
Yeah. Well, having a kid for me was the exact same way. Like a switch went off, and it does change a man. And you know, you mentioned something that really spoke to me just then when you said it should have been my wife. I should have realized, right, with my wife that it's time to start looking forward, and I am responsible for someone else. And I experienced the same thing because, you know, for me, it was just never having a compass as to what a real good marriage was. And I actually didn't, you know, it was more to me like, here's this person I love, I'm spending the rest of my life with, but like, she's a person, I'm a person, you know, and obviously I would do anything for her. I would, you know, defend her to the death, all of those things. But that realization of it's not just two people, it's a union, it's a family we've created now that will last into generations from what we create. And that really didn't come until later for me as well, man, when I had a kid. And then even later than that, when I mentioned therapy, I went to marriage counseling with my wife, and the counselor asked us, it kind of caught me off guard. She asked us, you know, rank in order of importance the people in your life. And I just assumed at this point we had a child, and I just assumed, okay, it's our kid, right? And then it's us. So I was like, you know, of course, because I had the perspective, a child is this helpless human, right? That we're fully responsible for. And so of course that has to be the first priority. And then, you know, my wife looked at me like I was insane. And she was like, no, I'm first and then our child. And I didn't truly understand that until that moment. And then, of course, later when I started to learn about building a family from a Christian perspective, it's like God, your spouse, your children in that order.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you don't love your kids, but your your significant other, your spouse is, I mean, first and foremost, like that is the foundation. That is the most
Yes.
important thing to the marriage and to the family. And so for me, it was just this paradigm shift that I experienced because I had honestly, up until that point, never even thought about it. And that's why the question caught me off guard. And then to hear my wife just be like, no, Dave, I put you first and then our children. It was just a moment for me that I'll never forget because it changed so many things. I don't know if you ever experienced something similar, because I know you mentioned I should have realized when it was just me and my wife that I'm responsible for someone else, etc.
Yeah.
Did
I,
you have that perspective? Because I know a lot of
I
people who grow up with faith already have that perspective,
right.
right? Because of how they're raised in the church and everything. But to me, it was just this earth shattering moment.
I did have that perspective, but I think I was mostly just going through the motions. Or
Mm,
like
okay.
I wasn't as intentional about those things. I was really intentional about being the best Army officer. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
Um, it's like you're an Army wife now. Figure it out. You know, like that. It's
Mm,
not. You know, I was very masculine in my interactions to my wife, which is something that men need to master. Is your family needs to see a side of you that only your family sees of you. You know,
yeah.
um, talking to your wife like she's one of your soldiers doesn't go over very well. So,
No, it doesn't.
and a lot of times I don't even think I didn't even realize I was doing it. But that's where I think I meant I should have led better. Is I should have dove into this type of self study and self responsibility, um, to have more mastery over that way of thinking and that uh importance. Like, and to your point about, your spouse should be number one. That's the first and most important relationship, and then the kids. Your kids are naturally ingrained to want that too. They want to see mom and
Mhm.
dad have the strongest, tight knit relationship. That is their world. And it's not until they're like teenagers that starts to slightly shift. And even then, like, I mean, I was 16 when my parents split up. Like, I knew a lot about a lot, not everything, but it's not like I was like a 2-year-old who had no clue what was going on.
Right.
It broke me into pieces, like it really messed me up. So to discredit that is just setting yourselves up for failure, and it leaves your marriage vulnerable to any number of problems. So if here's a good point too, a dear friend of mine, his parents had a really good marriage, and there wasn't any like kicking or screaming or alcoholism or that kind of stuff. And one of them had an affair, and they got divorced like really abruptly. And he was like, my parents had a good marriage, so I don't want a good marriage. I want an incredible marriage, because if you don't have an incredible marriage, like first tough time might break you, and it's
Yeah.
that, like, I thought about that. I'm like, man, we should fight as hard for being the best husband and father, or harder, than anything else we do, especially with the fatherhood aspect. You only get to do that for 18 years, like
Yeah.
really, like after that, it's like every now and then.
Yeah.
So that, for me, it's been this huge kind of shift in kind of jumping ahead to like when I'm old and decrepit and looking back on like, did I apply myself to where it mattered most? I think family has to be like number one, or very like close to it, depending on the situation of your life. But I'm in that season right now. If you have younger kids, that's your season. That's job number one, and everything else you got to do just enough to kind of keep it going. I think
Yeah.
that's my perspective.
No, I agree. And even from the perspective of us historically as people, right? Before we had all of these modern day auxiliary things that go on in our lives, all you had, all you had was your family. That was the
Hmm.
entire purpose, right? Survive, protect, and provide for your family. There
Yep.
weren't jobs and podcasts and
Right.
the military and this
Right.
and that. I'm talking like pre-modern man.
Yeah.
It's ingrained in our DNA. That was the only purpose. That was the purpose you served. It is the most important thing. And so I agree with you fully. Um, I had a interesting conversation with a man who I respect fairly recently. I serve on the church security team every other
Okay.
Sunday, and there's just a lot of great men on the team. They're all older than me, and I really like to surround myself with men I respect who are also older and have lived some life. You know, all
Agreed.
of these are married men, they're godly men, they're great dads. And he was telling me about an interaction he had with his teenage son where his son kind of mouthed off to mom.
Mm,
And it really struck me what this man told me he said to his son. He said, "Hey, don't talk to my wife that way."
Yep.
And just the way because he could say, "Don't talk to your mom that way," but he didn't. He said, "Don't talk to my wife that way." And that just really struck me and stuck with me because that embodies exactly what we've talked about, right? Like
Yep.
your spouse is first, your wife is first, and then your kids, right? Like, don't talk to my wife that way. And I don't know, man. I just thought that was really powerful.
Yeah. I actually learned that quite a while ago. So I've actually used that several times.
I'm
And
catching up to you, man.
not just with my own kids. Well, so I've done a lot of therapy. A lot of therapy. I've spent a lot of money on therapy. So it works, but it'd be great to just not need it in the first place. So
Sure, sure. Yeah, well,
so
you know.
anyway, um, I guess to maybe like tie the bow a little bit with like how the childhood stuff really came out in my marriage. You know, so at the end of the day, right? Like I was not really a man. I really don't think I was truly a man yet because I was still looking at things from the perspective of like I deserve this or like it's very
Mm,
selfish. Like how you thought when you were a young dumb 18 to 20-year-old, you know, horny teenager running around, right? So
right,
like
right.
I still had that mentality in so many aspects of my life. And it's just a flawed way of looking at the world, you know. And that is not a good mentality for being a good husband. Um, After our daughter was born, my wife had extremely severe postpartum. Um, and I think both of us were just completely caught off guard by everything. And so I'd like to give a quick little example that'll help like people understand this. So like imagine 3 hula hoops, right? You've got yours, trying to get it in frame. Yours, your wife has one, and then your marriage has a third hula hoop.
Mhm.
So in the ideal setting, you would have 1 foot in your hula hoop and 1 in your marriage, right? So you have all your stuff and the marriage, and your wife would have the same, 1 in hers and 1 in the marriage hula hoop. What happens often is spouses like to jump in the other person's hula hoop when it's like, oh, I'm going to fix all your childhood stuff, or you just need to do this and that. And in reality, it's like, man, you didn't make that problem. You can't fix that. That's their hula hoop. You got to stay in your lane a little bit, you know? And where that comes to is like childhood stuff specifically. So if you have challenging childhoods, what happens emotionally is we get stuck at whatever age that stuff happened to us. And so it's like your inner child, quote unquote. And when you as an adult show up to similar situations, there is physiology. Your amygdala kicks in. It's the fight or flight response of this
Mhm.
worked to keep me alive when I was a kid. I'm going to do it again now. So you show up as, so for me, a scared 16-year-old insecure boy when my wife needed a man, you know? So all our interactions, and she was doing the same with all of her stuff. And so her being depleted with postpartum and just like all this stuff, all of our crap came to the surface and we had not really dealt with any of it. And so we both just basically became the worst versions of ourselves in our interactions to each other at a time when I should have been the most supportive and like in tune to her through a very difficult time, right? So, man, immense amount of regrets for I wish I would have learned this better and all, we can play the what if game. The fact of the matter is like I was extremely harsh, and then all my old wounds of abandonment and all these other things, I started resenting my wife. And I'll get, there's a lot of stuff there, but I had also been addicted to porn since I was like a teenager. I don't think our parents really, we're the generation where our parents didn't really realize like how pervasive internet pornography was. And so that was something I struggled
Right.
with like my whole life. And then the army does not make that any better. Like on deployment,
I can imagine.
you literally like share your hard drive with other people and like, oh, you'll learn a lot about what he's into, And I mean, that's literally how pervasive it is. I don't think people realize that. So it was like so normalized in my life. And like, I know better. I'm a Christian. I grew up in the church. Like, it's not good. But I guess I downplayed, how damaging that is to your relationship, because you screw yourself up. You can't show up and be present for your wife. Yeah, but really messy. And we got out of the Army and moved to Texas, and things just, we'd been like really bad for a while, and we had a huge blowout fight, and I basically told her to pack up and head right back to Tennessee and like, don't come back. Like, I'm just not doing this anymore. So she did. She went home, took our daughter back to Tennessee, and so for like 3 months we were separated, and I hired a lawyer and everything to get divorced because I was just completely checked out. Like, my heart was so hardened. I was so resentful. And looking back at it, I'm just like so ashamed of myself for allowing myself to get that angry and that hardened toward her. I try to be gentle with myself too. That's something you learn in therapy. Is like, you have to be gentle with your faults. But yeah, man, it's like the worst period of my life, really. And when our daughter was like 9 months old, no, she just turned a year old. So like they moved back, and then a few months later she turned a year. So, not a great time to be having all this go on. And eventually what happens is you delude yourself, right? You start to believe your own lies. You isolate yourself from people who can hold you accountable. So then everything becomes permissive. You keep towing the line a little bit more and more, and like, fine, I'm just going to live for me, So I had this completely just really evil way of thinking. And to my undying shame, I broke our marriage vows. I've been an adulterer. And so that was, like, after it happened too, I was just like, who am I? Like, I hated myself. Like, I still hate to like even acknowledge this about myself, that I've done this, right? But we did decide we wanted to work on it. And man, the next couple of years were extremely, it's probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And it didn't need to be. That's the thing for people who are like maybe contemplating marriage. Like, my story is like hey, don't do what I did. That's the moral of my story. But it was at that point where I was like, I don't know who I am anymore. Like, I'm a man of principle and action and like fighting for what's right. And I've basically become the antithesis of everything that I've believed my whole life in a very short period of time. And I was like, I had this. So, I obviously confessed to like our counselor first. I'm like, I don't even know how to go about trying to make this right and everything. And I forget the exact order of everything. A lot's happened, but I did. You have to confess to your spouse, obviously, and hope that they'll at least forgive you enough to want to work on repairing things. And my wife did give me that grace. And so over the next several years, right, there's a lot of work done to kind of repair all that damage I did. And like to your point earlier, there's damage both ways, but I'm responsible for me and what I did. And no matter what she did to me doesn't give me a right to go do any of what I did. So,
correct. Yeah.
It's time for me to own up on my crap and that's when I learned about the silently seduced, because my therapist was like, hey, yeah, this is really not like you either, George. There's a lot more going on. I think you need to read this book and then let's talk, And so that kind of took me down the rabbit hole. But, that became an outlet. It was my outlet. It was my way of trying to fix this wound of, like that was somehow going to make it better. Just let me make more wounds, to fix the wound. But we do that, man. People do that. That's why people are addicts. That's why people, do crazy things. Because we're all just trying to like stop all this pain. What I should have done, because I know better, is turn to God. Mm-hmm. And I should have been surrounded by godly men who would breathe life into me and call me on my crap, but also sustain me when I needed it most. And I probably wouldn't have made those poor choices, but I knowingly isolated myself from anyone and everyone who could truly hold me accountable, and basically built myself a little cheerleading squad of like, George is an awesome dude. Let's go out drinking and woo, and like, yeah. So it's a slippery slope. It happens really fast. And the last thing I want to say kind of about that whole experience is, people, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who don't believe in God, but we talk about like God's amazing grace for us. I have never seen a more pure version of what real grace is than what my wife has extended to me in our marriage and forgiving me for committing adultery and for all our faults, and for, we're still not perfect. I mean, there's just the most beautiful thing, and I mean, I will be forever in her debt for that. And that's not like, a lot of people I'm sure are going to ask too, like, how could she do that? Why didn't she just leave you? You're a piece of trash type of thing. And again, it's God's grace. I'm sure he showed up in her at a moment when she probably wanted to say, I'm done. And yeah, he worked through her. So, I mean, I have learned so much about so much. And I hope that my story, sharing all this, for anyone out there, if you've made some terrible mistakes, all hope is not lost. We just celebrated 10 years of marriage. We had a great couple days doing that, and we still go see our therapist. We saw our therapist on our 10th anniversary, actually, and we had an amazing session where, because we've done a lot of work now. We've dug through all this stuff in our past, not just in our marriage, but also our childhoods. And through that, too, I have so much more empathy and compassion for my wife than I ever would have had, because I truly understand everything that she's been carrying for so long. So I know I've been talking a lot here, but it's really heavy stuff. But I just love... So, Whitney, if you ever watch this, I love you so much. And I'm so thankful that you decided to give me another chance and to give our marriage a chance, and to let forgiveness occur, because I'm forever grateful and I love you.
Man, first,
want to take a break?
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for sharing that, man. I mean, undoubtedly, people listening probably going through similar things, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're human. We're fallible, and I know it takes a lot to share something like that. And man, I went and saw this movie, The Blind. Have you seen it or heard of it?
I've heard. I haven't seen it yet.
It's in theaters right now. It's the story of Phil Robertson, the patriarch behind the Duck Dynasty, everything that's come up from that. And I didn't even realize this about him, because I've always just sort of known them to be this godly family who embodies a lot of family and marriage, wholesome values and everything. But he went through something very similar when he was a young man, and Miss Kay, his wife, extended that same just amazing level of grace to him, and stuck by him through all of it, and forgave him, and they've created what they've created. And so for me, just seeing that, it just gives you hope, right? Because this man went through something that so many men go through, and made a lot of mistakes and committed a lot of sin, and it was over like a 10-year period. I mean, it was far worse. Not to, I mean, it's what's bad is bad, but yeah, it was for 10 years, and this woman stayed with him and gave him that grace, and he found God and repented, and the rest is history. They've created this amazing family and this empire, and impacted millions of people through their story. And it's a really great movie. It's really well done, and just would recommend that to anyone who's experiencing something similar, or has experienced something similar, or just wants to go see a good movie. Because I was thinking about it the whole time you were describing your situation, and there are a lot of parallels there, and I think that's pretty common, that men make these mistakes, because many of us are wired the same way. You mentioned earlier, we're not emotional like women, and so oftentimes we wall ourselves off and create this sort of environment that does nothing but encourage more bad behavior. And I mean, really, that's not being a man. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's retreating to boyhood as you described it,
Yep.
right? And
Because when I look back at like our situation, you know, I would always be like, well, she's doing this and she that and she that. And it's like,
right.
you know, okay, so I'm gonna hit you with something, and I can't take credit for this. It's John Michael Clark. Look him up. He runs a thing called the Family Captain, but he says there's 3 legs of
Okay.
leadership for masculine leadership of your family. The first is authority. So you have the authority to lead your family and make the decisions and make the outcomes. You're responsible for the outcomes, which means all of it, right? So even if
Mhm.
your wife is the one misbehaving or whatever, you're still responsible for your family. And the third one is compassion, and it's your family. You love your family a lot, and they know it, and so you have to have all 3 together in order to truly be leading. So I was really good at authority, and that's about it in those
Yeah.
years. Because
Right.
she this, she that, she that. Okay, if I would have changed my perspective and thought, and here's the thing too for men, especially Christian men listening to this, you have a head too, God. So
That's right.
you're the head of your wife, but he is the head of you. So this is something I've had to learn. It's like, George, you can't do it all on your own. You need to ask God for help a lot. You're going to snap, you know, like you can't shoulder it all. Um, so in those moments, if I would have been more in tune with him and surrounded by, wise, godly men to speak this into me, in those really hard moments, instead of me raging and building resentment and getting angry at her and everything, and saying, oh, well, she this, she that, I could have taken responsibility for ultimately the outcome of our family and would have had the grace to extend to her. And then also would have learned more about, like, well, maybe I should peel back the onion a little bit of what she's saying and what's the emotion behind that. Because she said a nasty thing to me. Okay, but that's a little odd. Hey, honey, are you stressed right now? Are you overwhelmed right now? Are you feeling scared right now? And that disarms her too, because now she's having to get in it. See what I'm saying? So like,
Yeah.
that's masculine leadership, is not letting the fight run you, but instead kind of rising above it and taking a minute to work through the issues. So I didn't do
Yeah.
that like ever. And when I go back in hindsight and look at all these really rough years, maybe once or twice I actually took responsibility, but it was the blame game, right? And so then we were just going at each other all the time.
So, you know, I often say that to appreciate the light, you need to experience some dark, right?
Mhm.
And I think to fully appreciate the light, right? To have a new level of appreciation for the light, you have to have known the dark in some capacity. Do you think that, and I'm not saying what happened is a good thing, I don't mean that, but now the strength of your marriage, after having been through what you've been through, do you think that it's made the two of you stronger in your union now?
I'm just trying to weigh that against, like, if we never would have done that, right?
Well, I
Yeah,
don't
but
weigh it against that. Weigh it
right.
against the state
What?
of your marriage prior
Yeah,
to that.
certainly. Because, like, for example, with the grace thing, right? Like, I've experienced some of the most beautiful forgiveness and grace ever
Right.
because of it. And yeah, I mean, how can you hear this and not think that's a God thing? You know, like that my wife
Well,
would forgive me and work through this for
I certainly
years.
do. Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I mean, out of the ashes, right? Mighty oaks of faith.
Yeah.
And
And now
so
I'm not saying, hey, man out there listening,
right.
go commit
Definitely
adultery
not.
and then you know you'll be better for it. But what I'm saying is like
I think
pri
if we decide to recognize the opportunity we have from the
of
darkness
course.
to
Yeah.
be in the light, then yes, we can
Yeah.
capitalize on that. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like, you have to go through something. You have to have some adversity in your life to really appreciate the
Right.
blessings. You know, if all
Right.
you have is a silver spoon your whole life, then you know your heart
Dude,
is nothing. So
nothing tastes better after doing a bunch of hard work out in the summer heat than just cold water,
yep,
right? But if you're chilling in the AC all day working at a cubicle and you drink some water, it's just some water. It's not really
right.
significant, right? And you know, I just think about a lot of marriages and how oftentimes, especially men, yeah, I think I probably brought this quote up when I spoke on Matt's program with you all. If not, I definitely brought it up when I had Matt on my show. But it's a Thoreau quote. I've said it many times. A lot of people say it, but most men lead lives of quiet desperation.
Yep.
And I think about the man just kind of going through the motions, and I think in many ways I was just kind of going through the motions. Marriage didn't mean what it means to me now that I have a godly Christian perspective on the union between my wife and I. And
Yeah.
our aim is to raise a Christian family and have a Christian household. And it's just a different thing. I look at it as a very different thing now through that lens than I did before. And we experienced some adversity, and I experienced a low point in my life that ultimately resulted in me seeking God, something I never would have thought I would have done ever. And when I approached my wife about, hey, what do you think about going to church? Yeah, I thought she was just gonna burst out in tears. I mean, she was like, "What? You of all people?" She was raised Christian
Hmm.
and never forced it on me. And she just always was like, you know, I didn't want to force it on you, but she just always kind of had this feeling that it would happen, right?
Mm.
Didn't know it would take 17 years of us being together, 16, I guess, because it was last year. But, you know, and ever since that, it not that we had a terrible marriage before, but it's just a different thing, and it's a
Yep.
different appreciation of this union under God and doing everything to glorify God now, and leading my household as a man, in the way that it's described in the Bible, right? And just I don't know, it has so much more gravity for me
Yes.
now, right?
Yes. Because otherwise it's just something you do, right? Like, oh,
Exactly.
you just get married, have some kids, get the
Yeah.
job, get the pension,
And you
retire,
do it because you just
die.
been told that's what you do, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know why I'm doing it. They just told me to do it,
Right.
so I'm doing it.
And it should be the most important fight of your life to build the marriage that everyone goes, I want that.
Right.
Because that is how, like, so we talk about all the things going wrong in our country and all that kind of stuff. It all stems back from this. Like, I really do think this is the root cause of 99% of it is marriage isn't worth anything anymore. It's just something people do. We don't take it seriously. We don't fight for it. I certainly didn't, like I should have. Um, but if you do, and it's not easy, but it's so worth it because it's not just going to enrich your life to know someone that well and to have them know you that well and to always be there in your corner. Um, it's a like I hate the term partnership. Like it makes it sound like a business deal. It's higher than that. Man and
Right.
wife is not a partnership. It is
No,
it
it's a
transcends
union.
that.
Yeah.
It's a union. Like
We are one.
you will not have a union with anyone else in your life, you know?
Nope.
It's this amazing experience that is challenging and rewarding all at the same time. But from that is also where fatherhood and motherhood flourish. And that's how kids flourish. And that's how they grow to be capable citizens and adults in our society. And so, like, a lot of these problems that we're seeing is because, you know, homes with one parent or crappy parents or divorces and all that kind of stuff, that's a humongous piece of the puzzle. So, I mean, that's why I'm hoping that my story kind of like wakes some people up when they listen to this, that if you aren't taking it this seriously, you're setting yourself up for failure. Maybe things right now are perfect. Maybe things are
Mhm.
great. You've got the marriage that everyone's like, oh man, they got everything going for them. Dude, life can happen in an instant. You know, family member dies, car accident, something bad can happen instantly. And if you guys aren't building that deep intimacy, and that's not just physical, that's
Right.
on every level, emotional and spiritual, together, you may not weather that storm. And again, if you're the man in this equation, it's on you to be building that responsibility and to be that stoic lighthouse in the storm to guide and direct your family through it. And if you are built on a foundation of sand, you're going to crumble, you know?
Yeah.
So it's extremely serious. Like, I hate to be so hyperbolic about it, but I think we're living in an age where it's just been cheapened so much that we need to use this strong language again around marriage and fighting for our kids and being a comprehensively well put together man. It's not enough to just be good at work.
Right.
That's one dimension of being a man. It's not everything. And on
Yeah.
the same token, too, only being husband is also one dimensional. You need to be many things,
Yeah. No, I agree, man. And the cheapening of marriage in today's society, and the way it's just lost its value, I think contributes to so many things. And whether it's no fault divorce, which there are arguments for and against that, but I think in general it leads to frivolous marriages,
Yeah.
right? That aren't built on much of a foundation, and it's not this thing that's taken seriously anymore because you can just end it. And
Mm-hmm.
it if you had asked me a few years back, before I had the perspective I have now, I would have said, of course, people should be able to just get divorced. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. And I don't know, man. I think that once you go down that road, it's just like, not to bring up something controversial, but it's just like abortion. So
No,
abortion,
let's get controversial, dude. Let's do it.
that's really the only way I know.
Yeah.
Abortion took away the gravity of sex in many ways,
Yeah.
right?
100%.
Because
Yep. It took away all the responsibility for both parties.
Right. Okay. So what? You get pregnant, you can just get an abortion. Never mind that you're murdering a child, right? But it took away all the gravity of that very important,
Mm-hmm.
sacred thing that happens between a man and a woman, that should happen between a man and a woman, with the end goal of creating life.
With intention.
Yes, with intention, to go back to your main point in all of this, right?
Yep.
And it's no different than the cheapening of marriage. Now, marriage doesn't mean what it used to mean because it doesn't have consequences, right? Sex doesn't have consequences anymore. We lead lives. When I say we, I mean us, especially in the Western society. Young people in the West lead lives that are largely absent consequences for actions that historically were loaded with consequence. It's like sex is like a handshake these days.
Yeah.
And
like you see people like bragging about body counts and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It's like, man,
it should be
they're gonna
you
wake
should
up
be
one
bragging
day.
the other way.
Yeah,
Like,
they're gonna
only
wake
one
up
for
one day
me.
and feel so empty, and it'll be too late.
100%.
You're damaged goods at that point,
Yeah, man, bro. I I have so much dumb luck because I never had a girlfriend in high school because I was so focused on getting into college, and the only way to do that was to get scholarships, and so I had to get good grades, and like, don't bother me. I don't want to mess with
Right.
girls. I'm on this mission. And I met my wife freshman year, first semester. First girlfriend, only girlfriend, became my wife, mother of my children. That was that. And it was dumb luck. I wasn't I wasn't planning to, like, yes, I'll meet the woman of my dreams and marry her and that'll be it. It just so happened that way. But gosh, man, looking back on it, for young guys listening, it's pretty freaking amazing. If you can, so date to marry. Look for the person you want to marry. Keep that in mind. Don't go for a hookup, right? It's
my co-host Brandon. I think he wrote an article on this on Twitter X. He writes. He's a very thoughtful guy. I've learned so much from him. And that was one of the ones he did recently. Was that should be one of the most important decisions that you as a young man agonize over heavily. And that's also something, this is where it's like having good role models is important. Having a father is important. The woman you select to be your wife, I mean, if you, like, equally yoked type of thing, right? If you marry someone who's contentious, guess what? You're going to have a lot of contention in your life, like that choice matters. And so if you make the choice and then you think maybe, oh, this is the wrong choice, well, you need to stick with it. And you can, and like, that's my wife and I, right? We've both said that. Maybe we just bring out the worst in each other. Maybe we're not fortunate. I think everyone says that to themselves.
Yeah.
Because it's an easy lie to like make it easy to call it off. And it's just not true. I mean, is there like the one? I don't really think so. I think you can, you know, we're getting way off in the weeds here, but in terms of making the choice, you should be very intentional about that as a young person looking to marry. And it shouldn't just be this, it shouldn't just be from like, oh, well, I just really want to get married, so she's good enough. You know, like that's not how that thought process should go. If you're listening to this and maybe you're a newlyweds or you're a few years into the road of marriage and you're kind of like having a similar story to mine, you will never regret working for it in the long run. Like when it's all said and done, and you stay married and you make it work and you find a way to fight for your marriage, I sincerely believe that it's impossible to regret that at the end of our lives. And I got to give a lot of credit to an organization called Mighty Oaks. It was founded by Chad Robichaux, who's a Marine Force Recon.
Yeah.
If you look up his story, his is pretty incredible. But like, you know, on the outside, he looked like he had life fall happening and he had it all together. And he is totally abandoning his family and walking out on his marriage. And it took a godly man coming into his life and being like, you need to change your life immediately. And he did. And so then he founded Mighty Oaks. And like, so I went there and that was kind of like the first lifeline to get my life back on track. Because like we're talking about now, I saw a bunch of other really hardened dudes who had deployed more than me and had fought more than me and all this kind of stuff, being just real and honest about all this crap in their life. And man, so many other people's stories were just like, oof, I'm happy with my problems, you know, like you learn pretty quickly in group therapy that like your problems aren't that bad. Not to downplay them, but it's like, it's good perspective to be like, okay, I can do this, you know?
Yeah.
And
I think
that organization saved my marriage for sure. Like my wife went for the women's program, and that kind of gave us it got our heads above the water to give each of us enough grace to each other to like keep fighting for it, moving forward. And that's what they say, fight for your marriage. So
yeah, that's what Miss Kay said in The Blind. My grandmother told me when I was a kid, one day you're going to have to fight for your marriage. Mm-hmm. And she said she told her grandmother, why would I want to do that? Why, if it's that bad, why would I want to fight? And it's just such wisdom, right? Coming from this elderly figure in her life who has lived it, who's been in it's like stuff will happen. It's inevitable, right? We're not perfect. Only he is perfect.
Yes.
We're made in his image. So with a little fight, we can sustain it. We can keep going, but like you're going to have to fight at some point. And back to what you said about, hey, if you're a young man, it's worth it. You know, keep this in mind. If it's a contentious woman, do you want that in your life, etc.? Also keep in mind that you are going to have to fight for it, no matter how perfect you think your situation is, your spouse is. But we are flawed, and the fight may not be big in magnitude compared to some other fights, but there will be fight. And I think another thing that has sort of contributed to the way society views marriage today is that, you know, a lot of young men are just like, why would I get married? It's not worth it, man. It's not, you know, and you see this all over Twitter or X or Twix or whatever you want to call it now. And
Twix, I like that. I'm going to call it that now.
I just put them both together. We'll just call it Twix. Yeah,
that's great.
But there's this huge wave of, they call it the red pill movement, which is ridiculous because it's, you know, the red pill is supposed to refer to reality. And a lot of this stuff, you know, it's driven by your Andrew Tates and the like. And, you know, when you were talking to me earlier about, I wasn't truly a man yet because I was still just focused on myself. That for me is a very defining moment. That's a rite of passage, so to speak, in becoming a man once you start to live for others, meaning your family, right? That's truly, there are many things that define a man, but that is a big piece of it, right?
Yes.
When you realize you're living your life not for yourself, but for your family, and you're responsible for others. And this whole red pill movement is so self-centered and narcissistic in
Yep.
nature in
Yeah.
many
It's all.
ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so young men are like, why? I'm not getting married. Why would I get married? Some woman to just come and take everything from me. And, the system. And look, I understand some of these sentiments, right? Because the legal system is largely stacked against men
Hmm.
in this regard. But gosh, man, I every time I see one of these young guys with this sort of nihilistic perspective on all of it, I just want to be like, look, bro, I'm telling you, it's worth it. It's amazing. It's beautiful. Don't buy into this BS.
Yeah.
But it it's rough. It's rough for young people, man. I can understand it and empathize, but at the same time, that is not the way, you know?
Yeah. I think I think the next big battlefield in terms of, kind of fixing marriage and fixing being parents, not just fatherhood and motherhood, um, in our country is kind of this next generation, right? They have, I mean, to be fair, they don't. Who do they have as good examples, right? Like,
Right.
I mean,
Right.
they don't have anyone to really look up to very well. So I can understand significantly the Andrew Tates of the world. That's an interesting kind of thing to analyze because they're essentially the backlash to feminism.
Yeah, it's the
So
pendulum swinging too
yes,
hard in the
and
other direction.
it's going way too far. And so like, does he say some things that I like? Yeah, absolutely. And like when you
I would
only
say
read that one, yeah, when you read
percent
that
of what he
sentence by
says.
itself, sure.
Yeah, yeah,
But look comprehensively. Look at the character. It's like you said, it's all self-centered. It's all like me, 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 me. Nothing in that to me says I'm a man who's confident in myself. And Nick Kumalazzo said this to me on when he came on our show. He was like, a strong man is not uh scared of others' success. You know what a strong man says to someone else when they succeed? Nice, man. Good
yeah.
for you.
Congrats,
Awesome.
bro. Yeah,
A strong man wants other men to win. He wants other people to win. So a real man living in authentic masculinity does not beat his chest and talk about how many, hoes he's pimping out on OnlyFans or whatever. It's like, dude, that's not manliness. That is not a man.
yeah,
That's an abusive, manipulative predator. you know, that guy doesn't speak for me. And so, like, people getting sucked up to him, like, oh, well, look at all these great things he says. Yeah, but the thing, you got to look at the comprehensive picture there. Is that really who you want your example to be? That not me, but yeah, I think it's unfortunate, right? This pendulum is swinging so hard back the other way that now you have people who are like, I'm never going to get married, and I just my heart kind of breaks for all these, young men who I hope they wake up sooner rather than later. But I mean
yeah.
that the thing is, if you wait too long for this kind of stuff, then you can't have kids, and there's just so much you miss out on that there's no getting it back. Like we only
Right.
get one life, and
But also, on the other side of it, George, just because I think this is it's a tendency of guys like us to always speak from the perspective of what we can be doing to be better, what men should be doing, right? Putting the responsibility on men, and it is in large part, but I do feel for these young guys when you also
yeah,
look at the landscape of
oh yeah,
available options out there. I mean, and a lot of it is online dating apps and stuff like that. It's
mhm.
cheapened
Well,
the
it's not dating. Dating is a very generous word to what those
yeah,
are.
you
They're
can't
hookup
even call it
apps.
that.
Let's
Right.
let's be
Hookup apps. Yeah.
Tinder is
Hookup
not dating.
culture. Right. And so you have women who are in many
Yeah,
ways just as bad if not worse than the young men
yeah,
because they're gosh, it's and part of it is this wave of pushback against feminism in some ways, but it's at the same time sort of this really weird amalgamation of feminism and aspects of traditionalism, a lot of the bad aspects. And what I mean by that is women saying, I want a man who makes six figures, is at least 6 feet tall,
yeah,
has at least a 6 inch, and that's the 3 6s, and you see all this, and then, but also,
3 6s, interesting.
yeah, I see that crap. If you want to go down a toxic rabbit hole, look at red pill Twix, but it's bad on both sides, man.
Oh
And
yeah, absolutely.
these women are like, just, I want to get a free meal, so
I
I'll
wonder how
go
many of
hook
them
up
had
with a guy.
I wonder how many of them had stable parents. I
Oh
wonder how many of
gosh,
them came from a household that had a strong marriage.
I would say the vast majority probably did not.
Right.
And
So,
look, there are
yeah.
great women out there, don't get me wrong, but I can see how young men can be disheartened
Mhm.
if they just jump on social media and they see all like, think about it, women are, they basically have all the power when it comes to gatekeeping sex. It's in the young, like, phase of a relationship. Like, so my wife, for example, um, to get a little personal, when I was in college, I was of the mindset, oh, this is amazing. I'm free. I've heard all these stories about college. College is all about hooking up and all this stuff. And again, dumb luck. Thank God I met my wife at a house party, and I'm like, "Oh, cool. I met a chick. I'm gonna hook up." I'm just a dumb, young, misguided young dude. And she's like, "Just so you know, I'm not having sex with you." And I was like, it like hit me like a freight train. I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't want to. Yeah, of course. We're not gonna. What do you
Yeah.
mean sex? Ha ha." But that
Yuck.
exactly. It gave me so
Yeah.
much respect for her, though, and it made me want to work towards
Yep.
something with her, right? When she was my first ever girlfriend, but I had had sex with girls, hooked up with girls, and it was a different thing. And so again, thank God that just by dumb luck, I stumbled across an amazing, virtuous woman,
Yeah.
and that tamed me. It civilized me,
Mhm.
and that's the effect a good woman has on a man,
Yeah.
right? But I just think that so many of these young men don't encounter women like that as
Right.
well. And that's not to put the blame on women. It goes both ways, but it's like
Yeah.
both sides are just hooking up and nobody's thinking about marriage, and uh, women blame men for all their problems, men blame women for all their
Mhm.
problems. All these young men are super bitter. Women don't understand men. There's no good women. And by the way, I'm going to go try to hook up with 3 girls this weekend. It's like, dude, you're perpetuating the problem.
Yep.
She's also perpetuating. It's, how do we get out of this, man?
Boy, I don't know if I have the answer
What
to
are all
that,
the
but
answers, George?
well, so I'm a girl dad. Uh, I I hate to like harp on, it lies with men, but I mean, if you're a girl dad, that a lot of that is on you, right? Like how you
Oh,
raise her,
100%.
you're modeling what she's going to expect. And so like your wife, right? She was raised in a good home that instilled values in her that like she had the confidence to tell you. I'm sure she thought you were awesome, right? Like she wouldn't be talking to you otherwise. Like she was testing you to see if you were someone that she wanted to hang out with and date, and right up front said, "I'm not having sex with you."
Yep.
That wasn't just because she's like an awesome person. I'm sure her parents instilled that into her, right? So
100%.
that's
100%.
like step one is
Yeah.
with your kids right now. That is how important this is for the young adults out there right now who are in the dating game. I guess I guess early 20s, late teens. Um, where are you going to try and find a girlfriend or a boyfriend? Is it at the club? Is it at the bar? Like, is it at a place that inherently produces a lack of values, or a place that expects values to exist?
Right.
Like ask
Yeah.
yourself that. And I don't say that from a point of like superiority, right? I was an idiot in college, going to the bars all the time, and I blew so much money at bars and partying and doing all this stupid stuff. Like I could have got a degree in it.
I thought I was
And
the only one.
yeah. So I don't say this of like, oh, I was better than you. Definitely, I was just as bad. And yeah, and I have a lot of regret about the fact that my wife is not the only woman that I've had sex with prior to marriage. Um, that it cheapened our marriage. It took away it's an experience that now other people have and this is before the adultery stuff, but I made that a lot worse.
Yeah.
Taking responsibility here, but and it sounds like a lot of people are like, oh, that sounds so lame. That's so cliche. It's like, it's not, man. I know I have friends who they've only ever been together and they waited for marriage. And I'm just like, man, I am so jealous because you know who has the best sex? Christians who are living in accordance with God, because you know what? He designed it. He created it. And the devil is a pervert. The devil distorts it and twists it. And he's really good at lying. And he's convinced the whole world that you should have as much as you have. And you know what you're doing? You're just having a transaction. You're shaking hands.
That's it. Yeah.
And the real intimacy and magic of sex is not the physical act. That's great. Don't get me wrong. Like, love it. Like if you don't say you don't love sex, then there's something wrong with you. Like, but
yeah, it's
the
pretty
beauty
great.
in marriage isn't just the physical act. It transcends. It becomes this spiritual thing. It's hard to describe, because people can only think of it in terms of, I got off.
Right.
And if that's all you're reducing it to, like, man, I just feel bad for you. Like your perspective on life is just so
you're
flawed.
just masturbating with another human's body,
basically,
instead of your hand.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
And I liken it to, so before I had a child, I didn't really understand when parents would describe to me the feeling of being a parent. I had no reference point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you say it's amazing, whatever, great. I've got a dog. I love him, but you truly don't know, George, until you have a kid and you feel that feeling that is indescribable. So I had a guest on my show recently who's with Moms for Liberty here locally.
Okay.
Her name's Caitlin. She's an amazing wife and mother and entrepreneur. And she described it as when you have a child, you see your heart walk outside of your body. And that's good. Made a lot of sense to me, man, because it truly, when I see my little girl, it's like a piece of me outside of me that I would do anything for. And it's just this love that is indescribable unless you have a child. It just simply is. I can't put it into words, but you're sitting here as a dad and you know exactly what I'm talking about, right?
Completely.
The same thing is true about having sex with the person you've decided to spend the rest of your life with and build a home with and build a family with, and truly have this once in a lifetime union that is going to last till death do you part. And that is so much different than this cheapened masturbation using another human's body instead of your hand. It's an indescribable feeling because you have so much, you share so much experiences and values, and you're building something, and it's just different. And it is the same thing. It's so hard to describe, but it's so much better. It's so much better. When you were like, who has the best sex? Christians. And I can completely relate having both perspectives now, but it's like, man, yeah, sure. I was with just not many, a few women before I met my wife. Again, dumb luck. Thank God I didn't have more time to run around and be an idiot before she locked me down.
Yeah.
But I wish I hadn't. I totally wish I hadn't. And you hear this dumb shit where these guys will say, no, men need to have sex with at least 50 women so that they know what they like and they get good at sex. And it's like, bro, no, you don't. All you're doing is cheapening it and making it this, like you said, transactional thing. You will not be fulfilled. You will not. And I again, it's like, I just want to shake these guys sometimes and be like, trust me, I've been there. Yeah. I'm on the other side of it now. This is what you want. I promise you. But alas, I was young and stupid as well.
Right. Yeah. I don't know what the fix is. It's such a complicated issue. And, I see,
you're right.
I see these clips on like social media and stuff too. And like, I see the things that some of these young women are saying, and like some like her like OnlyFans performers, they'll come on podcasts and they ask him stuff like, so do you think it's weird that, men don't want to marry you? And they're like, well, yeah, it's like really misogynist. Or it was like, well, do you want to marry a man who doesn't make six figures and stuff? And like, oh, definitely not. And it's like,
Yeah.
do you hear yourself talk? Like,
Yeah.
do you realize how? Um, and again, I'm not trying to bash women or men or anything.
But it is weird that men
Which,
aren't allowed to have standards
oh
and
yeah,
women
well,
are.
that's yeah,
Right? If you're a guy and you say, I don't want a fat chick, you're a misogynist. But if you're a woman and you say, I don't want some bum who doesn't make six figures, go you, sis. It's like
hmm
a complete double standard. And all it does, again, is it makes these young men feel worthless,
it's a
you
double
know, and
standard because strong men haven't stood up and say this is stupid,
yeah. Well, or they're just
or their
busy
mothers
in their
haven't said no,
marriage.
that's
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but
and
I think that so that's the problem. I think honestly, the last 20 years, I think good men, they've been the silent majority or whatever. Well, where's that gotten us? Where has being
right.
silent and not taking the fight to where it needs to go? All that we've done, all that the generation before did, passed the buck to us. That's
Mhm.
all they did. They let all this insanity run rampant, and they didn't go say and stop it in its tracks. And that's the thing too. With a lot of these people, they don't actually have value or character or conviction. It's just like what they think is right. So the second that someone with actual conviction stands in front of them and doesn't just cave to like, so yeah, someone asked me, do I have standards? 100%. I married my wife in part because she's physically attractive and she's not fat. I'm based AF. Like,
Right.
go ahead, cancel me.
Sure. Yeah.
The more we normalize that, and that's because I work hard too to keep myself fit. And it's not like
Yep.
if she gains some weight, I'm going to divorce her. That's not what we're saying. But to deny that that's an element of attraction is stupid. Like you're just a liar.
Yeah.
They show their face anyway. So it's with us now, right? We're at the age now where we know better, and like our peers, we need to stand up and call this crap out and stop it, because then our kids are going to have to, we're going to pass the buck otherwise. So as much as I like don't want to have to go get involved in like fights on the internet or whatever, or traveling or whatever, but if I don't, then someone, I don't know, it's just going to keep perpetuating in this direction. I think so.
Yeah.
I think the time to act is now, or it
Yeah.
was 20 years ago. But
Right. I agree with you. And I just want to emphasize the point you made earlier with what we instill in our children, because that truly is the answer, right? Unfortunately, stable two-parent godly households is a small percentage of children in America today, but you know, it starts with our parenting and raising both of my girls to know what a good man is via how I treat my wife, how I
mm-hmm.
treat my children, how hard I work, the example I am the first example of a man in their life, and I want them to. So I think I said, I don't know if I said it when I came on with you guys, but I would always hear "do as I say, not as I do" from
Yeah,
parents. Yeah. That
lead
is
by example.
such. Yes, man. Do what I do because I'm striving to be the best and I'm living a godly life and I'm living life the way you should live life, or at least you should look for a man who does the same, right? Respects
Right.
your mother, prioritizes God, treats, your children with dignity and respect, and is present and instills the correct values in them, so that, like you said way earlier in this thing, it perpetuates downstream, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's the answer. But I do think that there is a lot to say for, because look, bro, I hear from 16-year-old kids, boys, all the time who have like latched on to me because
Mm-hmm.
they have no father figure in their lives. And honestly, man, that hit me with a lot of weight when I made the realization that, holy shit, there's young boys out there who don't have a dad that are looking to me for this
Yeah.
advice that their father should be giving them. And so I take that very seriously. And guys like you and what you're doing with your podcast, and Matt Boudreau and what he and Tim are doing with their schools, and what he's
Mm-hmm.
doing with the men's group and everything, I think that the tide is turning. So you mentioned that hard swing of the pendulum in the other direction with the red pill crew, but it's starting to come back to the center a little bit with what we're doing and what we're advocating for. And I have hope, I
I
guess.
do too.
You
Yeah.
know, I don't want to be totally nihilistic and have people think that it's all screwed, right?
Yeah, yeah, I know we probably sounded a little negative. I genuinely believe we're actually on the verge of a great revival.
Yeah.
If you look across American history since like the time of the early colonies and stuff, there was like the Great Awakenings. They were called. There's a first and second Great Awakening. I forget the exact years, but um, it's been a long time since we've had one like that. Where it's been labeled a thing, and I legitimately think I'm seeing people that I never thought would be Christians become Christians. Kat Von D just got baptized publicly.
Me,
You know,
dude, me.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I think here's why, and it's not even just like oh God, well I do believe God is the only way, right? But I know for a lot of people they're going to immediately discount everything I'm saying because of that.
Right.
So let me break it down from a very practical point of view that doesn't have anything based off of my religious view. The promise for our generation, I think the one a little bit above us and behind us also, right? So people who are maybe in their late 20s now and maybe early 40s, right? This group of people were kind of sold this message that go to college, get a degree, go work in corporate America, wait to have kids till you're like in your early 30s so that you can have a nice big home and all, and the BMW and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And then maybe get married and have kids. But if not, it's okay because, women can do everything men can do. And, men, you don't need to be, warriors anymore. You can go work these cush corporate jobs and just be smart and all that kind of stuff.
And by the way, it's all about you.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And it's all about you. It's all,
Yep.
go follow your heart, chase your dreams, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff that's been pushed on our generation. And I think, the younger generation now is looking up at that and they go, that's a false promise.
That didn't work out so great. Yeah.
Well, I mean, here's the other thing too. Like you can look at the economic charts of like what our parents made and what it costs to buy a home and like the percentage of their income, like even with the interest rates being as high as they were like in the early 90s and 80s and stuff.
Right.
It was still like, I think maybe 10% of their income to like buy a home, like to pay a mortgage. Like I can't even fathom how little of their income they were paying proportionally to own a home. And it's like nowadays, could you imagine being 20 right now and like, I got to find a place to live?
No.
Making, I mean, what do you make? Let's say you have a college degree. I don't even know. What does an entry-level job pay now for someone straight out of college with zero experience?
40K, 50K, maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, where are you going to go live? Like Wyoming? Like Casper, Wyoming, maybe you could afford a home? Like
I would actually love it if I were a young guy living in Wyoming. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But
it does sound amazing now, but my point is if you're living in California or even Dallas area, Texas is super expensive. Just practically it's not even possible. So this whole promise of like, go through the system, I think people are just seeing like that doesn't work even from a very practical point of view.
Right.
If you want to entertain the religious point of view, we can go down that route too, but the reason too is because we're not called to just be on this earth and live for ourselves. You're called to serve a higher purpose. And wherever you are, whatever you've been through, and whatever your giftings are, it's all different. But that doesn't make you any less useful than someone else. And you asked me earlier too about like with all the pain that we've been through in our marriage, does it make our marriage stronger? Maybe it's not even about us. Maybe it's so that like I can share my story here, and my wife can share her story with other women. And maybe that makes an impact that extends way beyond what I could ever imagine. I don't know. But
yeah.
I do believe that there is that element of what God's design for us is. And, a lot of people are going to, again, discount that. But
that's
when
fine.
you start, you experience it, having become a new believer yourself relatively, soon, you can see the difference in how you view everything in your life now.
Everything.
By knowing there is a higher purpose that transcends what you are capable of doing, there's almost it's not like passing the buck. It's not that kind of like peace. It's a genuine peace of like, hey, maybe I am struggling and there's a lot of things I'm battling right now, but I know that it's not in vain. Whereas if you don't have that hope and it's all for you and things are still not going well, then, what's the answer?
Yeah, there are so many aspects to it, man, and I'm still discovering them. as I go. I'm
Yeah.
so new in this,
Well, and I
but
think we continue to discover it for the rest of our lives. Like, I mean, I've been a Christian my whole life, and the bounds of which I've come to understand year over year is just amazing.
yeah, and that's exciting, right?
It
And
is, yeah. You
even
think you
even
think it's 1 to 10, and then you learn it's 10 to 100, and then you realize it's 100 to
yeah,
1,000. It's like what you're capable of and what you learn just continues to grow.
right, man, and even simple things like in times of despair or when I'm feeling down, I would always retreat within myself. I don't do that anymore. I don't have to rely on internal dialogue solely because now I can talk to God. I can
Yeah.
pray on it, and it's again, it's hard to put into words, but I it changes everything, man. Everything you
Yep.
do, you view through the lens of your faith. And for the first time, I mean, look, it's not like I was some completely hedonistic,
Right.
rudderless ship on a stormy sea, but now everything has a very solid scaffolding that
Yeah.
that makes the decision binary in most circumstances, right? Like,
Hmm.
is this the godly thing to do? Yes or no? Period. Will this please
Right.
God? Yes or no? It became so clear in so many areas of my life, man.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too because there's literally a manual.
Yes, there
It's
is.
called
Yeah.
the Bible, and so it's
Yeah.
like uh, yeah, that's the funny thing about it too. Is like in those times of struggle or in a season where you're maybe you're feeling a little lost or something like that. You'll read a verse or you'll talk about it with like some brothers who also believe or something like that, and they'll just say something to you, and it just your mind is just expanded to
Mhm.
new possibilities that you never would experience otherwise. And so it's kind of like we were saying earlier, where until you're a parent, you can't really understand what that feels like and what it means, and it's the same with this.
Yeah,
But
I
I
agree.
look back, and I've shared a lot of my faults here on this episode, and a lot of my problems. Those were all the times when I was not walking with God. I was relying on George's own understanding.
Mhm.
And there's a verse that says, "Lean not on your own understanding." Right? It tells us to call on God. So in all the times in my life where I struggled most, it's because I was arrogant enough to think, "I've got this. I know what I'm doing. I'm capable. I can handle it. I'm a good man. I have all these values." And look at what I just told you in this episode. So if that doesn't strike a word of caution for you, I don't know what's going to wake you up then. Like, I mean, my
Right.
whole story is that like I tried to do it all myself and look where it got me. So the more that I've grown, um, not just in my walk with God, but just as a man and talking with guys like you and learning from all these different perspectives, the more I'm convinced that we cannot do it without him, and we can't do it without brothers either. I think that's another big problem to your point about like how do we fix this whole like hookup culture stuff. I don't think there's enough men and young men too who are positively seeking genuine vision and genuine purpose for their lives together and holding
Mhm.
each other to it. Um and so yeah, they just go find it wherever they can. And I think that's a big aspect of it too.
Right, they find it wherever they can, or they commiserate together and
Right,
just
yeah, yeah.
become an echo chamber
Yep.
of yeah, yeah, 100%, and man, I mentioned serving at my church and surrounding myself with this group of older godly men, and one thing that I can say is having, and I have other groups of men who I associate with, and we hold one another to standards. We also talk one another through things we're going through as husbands or as fathers or as just men navigating the world. And it's powerful to be going through something in your life and then hear from an older, or not even, doesn't necessarily have to be older, but a man you respect
Yep.
who, and again, as Christians, a godly man, and he says, "Hey, brother, I went through that. Here's how I dealt with it. Right here's th- what helped me get through that season." So not only do you get great advice that can help you navigate the issue. But man, it really does mean something to hear someone you respect
Oh yeah.
say, I dealt with the same problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so important for us as men to hear. I'm sure someone's listening to this like, damn, George went through that issue. I'm going through that same thing. All I've felt is shame. I've hated myself.
Mm, yeah,
There is hope. I can get through this, right? And so
there
I
is.
I agree with you 100% on that. And we as men, we tend towards isolation, especially as we get older and
We
it's just you got to seek that out.
Yeah. So like we'll have a lot of friends, but it's like to go watch football and drink beer, or
Yeah,
it's like we do you are they really your friends? Like
right.
do they know the real you? Like that's what I'm talking about. When I say you need like a brotherhood, you need a tribe. It's it's those guys that you are real like this. They know your crap and like they say I've been through that too. Like that's where brotherhood is built. That's where the the benefits come where they say,
Mhm.
"Hey, man, I know you and I love you, but you got to do better than you're doing right now. This is
Right.
unacceptable. And if you
I was
want to still
about to
be a part of
say,
this group,
yeah, hold you accountable.
you've got to fix it." But
Yeah.
on the flip side of that coin, it's also when, "Hey, brother, you've done nothing wrong, and this sucks. I love you. I'm here for you,
Yeah.
man." And or like
Yeah.
I've been through that too. So it's both, and it's going out and hanging football. I love football, dude. I'm a Oregon football fanatic, right? I went to the U of O. I'm like this weekend, huge game against the Huskies. But at the end of the day, it's all frivolous. Like
Right.
if I called my brother and all I talked to him about is only Oregon Ducks, what a sad little relationship I'd have with my younger brother, right? Like
Yeah.
it's total. Like I could talk about that with anybody.
Right.
But no, like my brother knows my crap. Like I call him up and we talk about like, man, are you struggling with this and that? Like that's what we're talking about when I say brotherhood. It's not the just have some friends. I
Right.
mean, if you have no friends, that's a starting point. But you, you gotta dare to be a little bit vulnerable, and that's scary, right? It's like the most terrifying thing. Um, but I've found, and I hope that you can see through this episode right now that I've been pretty vulnerable, and I've found that in all the group therapy and all that kind of stuff that I've done, the more that you just be raw and real with people who deserve to hear it, right? Like I'll put that out there too. It's like you don't just go tell everybody your full story, right? But for people who are also invested in being part of that tribe, don't hold back. Put it out there. You may be surprised at how much grace and forgiveness there exists, or just even acknowledgement. Like, man, I haven't been through that myself, but I respect you so much for telling me that. Thank you.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, and not only that, like getting it off, like it's
Oh yeah.
freeing,
You're
man.
taking the rock out of your pack and you're putting it down. You're letting it
Yeah,
go.
exactly. Exactly. And that is huge. Feeling that relief because I've had several things in my life that like it took me forever just to talk about the fact that I had abusive parents or my
Mm.
parents were drug addicts or all the things that I openly speak about today, man. The first time I ever actually told someone about that, it was like, oh my
Yeah.
god,
Oh,
I
I
can
can only
breathe.
imagine.
Yeah, bro. And so that's another aspect
Yeah.
is
So
how
if
freeing
I
it is.
can, like in my story, right? So I had this facade of like, I was this hardworking guy. I'm an achiever. I always like tried to be the best. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't always, but like I worked really hard to like do well, right? And so I could be recognized and all that kind of stuff and had values and principles. And in my head, I was like, if they only knew,
Mhm.
if
Yep.
they only knew.
And you carry
And
that
when
with
you,
you.
oh man, yeah. Like you want to talk about my biggest wound? That was the wound I created myself. I built my
Mhm.
own prison of if they only knew. So even when I was in the military, like on active duty, and I was doing really well and like recognized, very well for my performance and stuff like that. Felt amazing. I was like, oh man, I've made it. I did it. Like I really pulled it off. But in my head, then immediately afterwards, if they only knew, if they
Mhm.
only knew the real Lieutenant Hayworth, um, that's lonely. That is a lonely place to be. That tears you to pieces. So
Yeah, it does, man.
when
It
you
does.
finally get real with other people, you have to get real with yourself at the same time. And that is where the true healing comes, because you're no longer living this double life. And maybe you've done virtually nothing wrong, but if you're still living that imposter syndrome of like, if they only knew,
Mm-hmm.
all you're doing is slowly killing yourself. And that's where you have to have a group of people that are safe to have those types of conversations with, who will build you up from them. And when you let those things go, you can now start building forward to the future. But if you don't, it's like having anchors to your feet and you're trying to swim in the ocean. It's just you're going to run out of energy and you will drown.
Yeah, man. Well, look, bro, we've been going for over 2 hours, believe it or not. I could talk about this stuff all night, but I want to be respectful of your time. And I got a little kiddo. She should be in bed, but if she's not, I'm going to tuck her in and be like, why aren't you in bed?
Yeah,
But no, man, let's do it again.
definitely. Yeah,
I,
we got a whole lot of stuff we could talk about.
dude, but this is important stuff, man. And it's
Yeah.
close to my heart, and I know it's close to your heart, and I think it's needed. And if you've listened this far, thank you guys for hanging in with us for 2 hours. I hope you took some value from it. George, where can guys or girls, where can people go to
Yeah.
find you online, social media, your podcast, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so we're on like every podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, whatever you prefer. The Present Fathers Podcast. It should pop right up. It's the logo that's on my shirt right here.
Official.
We're on Instagram, The Present Fathers Podcast on Instagram. YouTube, I think, is just Present Fathers. We have a link tree, so what I can do is just put that in the description of this, and people can click that, and you can literally find us everywhere. But yeah, we if you like to watch, we always have the panel, the video like this that we're doing right now. If you prefer to listen, you can listen on your podcast platform. But yeah,
Use Spotify because they're less communist.
yeah, I like Spotify a lot. That's where I listen to all my podcasts. So
Me too. No, listen wherever you can, guys. And again, thanks everyone for listening. George, thank you for being so gracious with your time, brother. It's been a true joy, and we got to do it again. I'm looking forward to coming on your show eventually. And everybody listening, until next time, keep your minds free.